Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
And welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. Checking some of the emails and some of the responses we're getting on Substack about some of our previous podcasts. And thanks so much for the input. I always appreciate your thoughts and your opinions on some of the key issues that we're talking about here, which is why we are so happy that so many of you are also subscribing to the podcast now, too, because your support there can help us to continue with this work. But one of the questions we're getting more, of course, is there going to be another election this year? I hope not. I don't think Canadians want that. The polling that we've referenced in the podcast indicates that by almost a 2-to-1 majority, Canadians just say, no, don't force another election. And talking about the opposition parties. Well, Pierre Poilievre is certainly not listening, rarely does, of course, when it comes to the best interests of the Canadian people. And he's at it again. I mean, he's making a speech. I guess what he's doing, and we talked about this a couple of podcasts ago, it looks like the Poilievre Conservatives right now are trying to tear another page out of the Maple MAGA playbook here and kind of projecting the late Charlie Kirk until let's get the youth. Let's talk to the youth about, the Conservatives being the only hope for youth in this country, which is not unlike the message that some of the Republicans, especially Kirk and others, were doing. I guess my plea here, my fervent wish is I hope we don't get suckered into this. I really do, because we saw what happened in the States when people fall for false promises. And we saw what happened in the last election here in this country from Poilievre. This is a guy he's three-word slogans. That's how he develops policy. Heaven help us, or any country really, that elects somebody like that as a leader that has no idea or no concept of what needs to be done here or no plan to actually do it. The sign, you always had the signs up at the podium there when he's addressing these people. Jobs, homes, and hope. That's what he's talking about here. I'll talk more about that in just a couple of minutes. But the reality here is that he talks in 10, 15-second sound bites. And, he's saying what people want to hear. In other words, yeah, we need affordable homes. Yeah, we do. But he makes it sound so easy. Then, we'll just get more affordable homes. We're going to increase your take-home pay. You got to ask yourself, if you're a voter, and I'd like to reach out to all the voters now, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do some of these things that you're talking about right now? Because if he couldn't help himself. I mean, he seemed in the speech he made in Toronto with a younger audience just a couple of days ago, he simply fell back to an awful lot of the conservative talking points from the last election, which, by the way, most Canadians, of course, gave a thumbs down to in the last election back in the springtime. You're repealing anti-development laws. Just what does that mean, anti-development laws? Please give me an example of that. Cutting taxes. Well, Prime Minister Carney's already cut taxes, capping government spending. Those two things sometimes go hand in hand, but I want to caution you about this. And we've talked about this for years now on the radio show and certainly on the podcast. When a government says we're going to slash spending, the obvious question that you need to ask is, what programs are you going to cut? What do you mean you're going to slash spending? Are you going to cut MP salaries? No, they wouldn't think of doing that. Are you going to maybe corral in the MP's pension, one of the most lucrative pension plans in the country? No, they wouldn't think of doing that either. So what are you going to cut? Well, let's talk about that, and let's talk about Mr. Poilievre's track record, because he's been a parliamentarian for a number of years right now, mostly as a backbencher, of course, until Stephen Harper stepped down. But when you start looking at government programs and what he's talked about doing right now, he says he's going to build more homes. He was in charge of the housing portfolio for a time under the Harper government, the later days of the Harper government. Well, he was in charge of that. 800,000 affordable rental units were sold off to corporate desires and corporate entities. This was government housing that the Harper government, and under Poilievre in this particular portfolio, simply dumped. The housing prices jumped by about 70%. Is this really the guy that you want to hand the keys to and say, yeah, you can look after the housing portfolio? Not so sure about that. Plus the fact that, and this is one of the things that really burned me, and I think burned an awful lot of Canadians, is in a roundabout way, and maybe not so roundabout way, Poilievre is blaming an awful lot of the housing crisis right now on immigration. It's those immigrants coming in here that are stealing all the houses and stealing all the jobs. And that's why youth can't find work, and that's why you can't get a home. Well, that's bunk. All right. From day one that this country became a country in 1867 and onward, immigration has built this country. Immigration has kept this country strong. Immigration has helped this country to grow economically, socially, in so many different ways. They're not the bad people here. They're not the bad guys. There have to be some changes. There has to be some upgrading to the qualifications and things of this nature, and the way that needs to actually roll out. And I think everybody agrees with that. But you simply don't paint people as the bad guys here. We've seen too many authoritarian societies and governments in the past that love to find somebody as the person who's causing all this. With the Nazis, it was the Jews and the Catholics, and on it goes. So with Trump, of course, it was the Hispanics, and then it was the Muslims. Remember the Muslim ban during his first term? How can we forget? And Hispanics, the murderers, the rapists, the prisoners are all coming up here. Those are the only people. If you're Hispanic, you're probably one of those three categories. What a load of crap. But there are people that are going to fall for that and say, yeah, it's all their fault. That's a very, very dangerous road to go down, but something that Poilievre certainly has the signposts for to go down that road, and we have to be careful about that. But back to the programs that he may or may not cut. Things that I think are near and dear are very important to us right now. He's not committed at all in any way, shape, or form to continuing some of the social programs. He voted against the Canadian dental care program. He has voted against the school food program. He's not committed to the $10 a day child care benefit. Those are all concerning programs. So even if, and I'm very doubtful about this, but even if he says, I'm going to increase your take-home pay, if you have to spend it on prescription drugs, you have to spend it on daycare, which, it was a real problem for an awful lot of people before, or you have to spend it on medical problems, medical concerns. And let's face it, if you're going to have a family and a kid, the chances of those things happening, life happens. And that's why the Medicare program is in place in this country and why it's so essential, I think, to it. You start cutting those programs, you start cutting the funding and the transfer payments to the provinces for that. That's when hospitals close. That's when you have a 1.5 to 2 year wait to go and see a specialist. Do we really want to go down that road again? I mean, the Conservatives can simply say, well, we've cut those programs, bully for us. But at what cost to the Canadians? I still remember, because we did a lot of programming about this back in the day with benefits for veterans. This was just, of course, after Canada's commitment to Afghanistan and the great work that was going on there. Veterans were coming back, and they needed our help. There were wounded veterans, there were people that were suffering from PTSD, and on it went. And the Harper government, with Poilievre, decided to basically cut the funding for that. They closed down offices that were supposed to be there for our returning veterans. Services like mental health issues and things of this nature were slashed. Suicides went up. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible situation. And the government actually went to court. The Harper government actually went to court. And their argument was that we have no moral responsibility to look after returning veterans. I mean, what a sick thing to say, but that was your government at the time. I don't want to go back down to that scenario once again. And we need to get some clarity on that. By the way, just as an aside, too, since we have an aging society, I know he's talking to young people right now, but, there are others involved in this, too. Poilievre actually voted to raise the retirement age to 67 as opposed to 65. Why is that important? Well, I'll give you a quick stat here that I think might put some relevance to this. Only 38% of working Canadians have a workplace pension plan. 38%. Okay, do the math on that. That means well over 60% of the people that are working right now don't have a pension plan, a work pension plan, which means they rely on CP, or they will when the appropriate time comes. And, with grocery prices being the way they are, et cetera, people may want to stay in their homes. There's so many problems, so many challenges right now. The government needs to step up. They don't start slashing funding for those programs, but Poilievre will not commit to that. And again, ask yourself why. And these are the questions that we've talked about on the podcast time and time again. Don't just listen to the glitz and the glamour here. Try to get some details about exactly what they're planning on doing. The environmental issues, I think, really speak for themselves. And I know that's a contentious point for some people. There are climate deniers. Certainly a number of them in the Conservative caucus seem to be of that ilk. But when they say about development programs, what they're talking about an awful lot of the time are environmental concerns and guardrails when it comes to development. And I know there are some people in the development industry that just are dead set against that, and they just want to have a free-for-all to do what they want, where they want, when they want. That's not the majority of people, I hope. I think we have to be cognizant of the impact on the environment, and past governments have set those guardrails. Now, they need to be reviewed every now and then. I totally agree with that. But you can't just say, okay, let's take those guardrails away, and you know what, all this development is going to be fabulous. That's very, very similar to a typical conservative ideology about trickle down. In other words, let's give the tax breaks to the rich, to the mighty, to the multimillionaires, and it will all trickle down because they'll invest back in their businesses and they'll make more jobs and everybody will live happily ever after. Well, no, it's not jobs and wealth that trickle down when that happens. It's something that you probably don't want to remember happening. And not unlike that video of Trump when he was, remember strafing the crowds that were, protesting on No King's Day. That's what can happen. Too many times when governments simply pander to the multi-billionaires, they keep it. That money doesn't circulate back into the economy. It goes to offshore accounts. It goes to their own wealth. And you need look no further than the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks and others to simply see it's all about them. They always, these sorts of people always put profit over people. And that's a very, very deadly exercise for this country and for any country in a democratic society. So, when you've got people of the ilk of Kevin O'Leary and Elon Musk endorsing Poilievre, that tells you something about what they expect and what they see him as. And we need to take a lesson from that. This is why we have always talked about on the podcast, do your homework on these situations. Don't fall for the glitzy one-line answers or something like that. We're not going to be governed by slogans. I hope the hell we never get to that point. But this is what he's selling right now. And when people are upset and when there are challenges, we look for easy answers. But there are no easy solutions to however we got to where we are right now. When the Prime Minister said earlier this week during his address to the University of Ottawa students that there are going to be some challenges and there's going to be a pain involved in some of this. He's right. He's telling you the truth. At this stage in our economic situation and our political situation, we need leaders that will tell us what we need to hear, not just what we want to hear. Poilievre is one of these, I'll tell you what you want to hear. I love the adulation. I love when you applaud. He's got no plan, but it sure sounds good. And that's the problem with that, of course, is if we fall for something like that, then we're going to find ourselves in deep, deep trouble, and we don't want to get there. So the moral of the story, I suppose, and this is an ongoing discussion we're going to have, is, first of all, we don't want an election. Yet the Conservatives have already sent a letter out, we're told, to their supporters, their financial supporters, and say, get ready, there's probably going to be an election, and we need to be ready for this. Well, if there isn't, it's going to be their fault. And now they're projecting it and saying, well, the Liberals are putting stuff in the budget that make us want to vote against it, and that's what's going to cause the election, so it's their fault. Bull. It's the Conservatives that are making demands that are not practical right now that may cause an election in this situation. And let's not forget that. This whole thing that Poilievre has been running his whole campaign on, and of course the last federal election campaign back in the springtime of this year. And I'll go back to the slogan that he keeps wanting to talk about here right now. He's talking about homes and hope. Pierre Poilievre is not selling hope. Pierre Poilievre is selling hype. And that's not what this country needs, not just today, but going forward. Let's keep that in mind. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks, as always, for being with us. On YouTube, great to have you with us. Don't forget to hit that notification bell. And thanks again to all the subscribers. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider it, would you please? Your support is greatly appreciated as we continue our work here. Thanks to Madeline Kelly for the great work putting this one together. And until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.